nap time here at KinderCare. All right, everybody grab your mats. Kids don't want to take a naps, and that's all adults want to do. I think we should switch. Like, here, you run the house for a little bit. I'm going to check out.
You go to work.
You go to work. I'm going to sit here and watch cartoons.
I'll
and take naps.
have recess.
What's for snack time today?
I'm gonna drink a Caprice.
Give me your,
Give me that.
Are we
give me
waiting?
your,
You want to reel them in
give me
now?
your juice
I
box.
think we're waiting for Susie's over there, Jen.
Kid snacks. So fine. That's why we just go to Costco.
I just turned it back on.
Wife's like,
All right,
you
yeah,
want
you
for
gotta go,
a
man.
snack? Put your lunchbox.
I
Okay.
think there's one or two, so.
Oh, look, fruit snacks.
I'm Neil, and I guess you gathered that by now. And let's see, I'm the fire ecologist in the regional office, like I said earlier. And I don't have a PowerPoint. So there's good and bad to that. It means there's no pictures, but it means that you don't have to sit in the dark either. So, and there's ceiling fans, so don't jump. I want to talk to you about a couple of things. This is not a lecture. Okay, I spend a lot of time, I spend way too much time just giving lectures. I teach a bunch of classes. I have an adjunct appointment at UC Davis, so I teach fire ecology there. And I do a bunch of class type things for us, for the Forest Service, and for other agencies too. And I decided to, actually last night, I sat down to tweak some kind of a presentation, and I decided, you know what, I'm tired of this. You guys don't need to see another PowerPoint, and neither do I. Did somebody drop this?
It's from there.
So anyway, please chime in and yell at me whenever you have any sort of comment. As you probably know, most of the Forest Service training kinds of things are really focused on, some sort of standardized training format, and this is a totally different kind of program. Stephen put this thing together, and I always point this out because he probably doesn't, that this is really his program. There isn't anything like it, I don't think, that's comparable anyplace else in the country, except for the ones that have sort of cloned off it, which we're hoping happens a lot more now. And the real values are that you guys actually work together, or a lot of you work together. It's locally focused. It includes, I think, pretty much all the material you would ever cover in some sort of standardized thing, only it's real. Right? You're not talking about some place 500 miles away, looking at pictures on the screen, you're never going to go there. You're talking about real projects. So I think it's a wonderful thing, even though he came up with it. So he had a couple of things that we were supposed to talk about. One of them was how our topics that we're talking about relate to the fire management program. Well, I'm a fire ecologist and I work in the fire management program. So I think that's actually, it shouldn't be an important topic, but it is. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And I'm glad that you guys have been pretty much covering a lot of this. I was glad that didn't you put on the screen this morning when the forest was established?
Actually, I only had the forest established date.
Okay.
Of being the, 1900.
Okay. So does anybody remember? How old is the Cleveland? When was it established?
1907? 1908?
Yeah, 1907 was close. Yeah, 1908. What day? No.
August? No.
Actually, it was July 1st or June 1st or something. It doesn't matter. It was about that long ago. It was a little over 100 years ago. And so if we're talking about fire management, Okay, what was the fire management program probably in the immediate years following that?
Suppression.
Well, do you even think there was much of that?
Let it burn.
No, I don't think there was, because you had state foresters, and reserves initially, so you didn't have much personnel till the 30s, maybe? You had the CCCs that were established initially then.
Yeah,
You had a lot of
real
control.
effective management of fire of any sort didn't come for a while anyway. It did eventually come, but I mean, really, when things get nasty out here, you think they were throwing people out there in front of it?
No.
Only if they were stupid or didn't like them.
Go, like that fire.
Oh, I know what.
Yeah, except things haven't changed much. Huh?
Guess not.
Well, I'm always doing frontal assault. Let us know when it gets to you.
I could bear to argue that a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I like to be that argument. So
Yes, please
I think over time, over years, we've kind of dumbed it down. Meaning back in the day, they were smarter. It was hot, don't touch it. And now you tell somebody it's hot, don't touch it. What do? They walk up and they touch it. So I think we've kind of dumbed it down. Firefighting, we will go stand in front of a front for the most part of it. People say, "Oh, you're stupid if you go stand in the front of that." Everybody does it. It's a common practice. Everybody goes and stands in front for a point of time to look and see what they got, what they can do. It happens. So I think over time, it's reverted.
Okay.
Okay.
No, I agree. But as far as I'm supposed to back up into fire ecology here, I guess. So, in terms of the way fire operated in ecosystems, how much effect have we had over the years? We're talking about the Cleveland. I mean, have we? We always talk. I mean, especially when we get to national classes, we talk about altered fire regimes. We talk about fire deficits and all this kind of stuff. But really, how much has fire changed as an ecological process here?
I think initially, we didn't have many people. You had ranchers, because this area was generally like grassland, so you had tons of that as an economy. And it didn't really change as an economy importance until 1910, when a lot of the fire policies were created because of large fires that ripped up homes and killed people and whatnot. And so they decided they needed to have that kind of thing in place, and it kind of evolved from there. To put something in place to start thinking about. And I think the policy initially was to not let fire do its thing. We need to put them out to save lives and resources, and things at risk.
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I was gonna say, I think generally on the Cleveland as a whole, we've had an opposite effect, is where the encroach of people has put too much fire on the landscape. So our management didn't limit fire. We're kind of fighting a different battle here of trying to get the stands to be at the proper age.
Yeah, but I mean, initially when it started, it didn't initially start with fire prevention as a policy implemented. I think it was spoken of, but it wasn't adopted initially.
No,
it was
that wasn't.
more of a, I mean, pre-1910. Pre-1910, you had natives putting fire on the land. You had ranchers using fire to maybe make better grasslands. And then when the fires came and they didn't want them to get so big anymore, the South had introduced prescribed burn more than our area did. And then when it took off, the policies were to put it out because of fear and all the things that were happening. And then after that, the Smokey Bear policy came into play, where it was still pushing that fact that it wanted to eliminate fires altogether instead of really implementing prescribed burn into the situation. That has actually become more enforced in the 70s, where we started looking at that as an asset to use fire with fire. Anyway, just a comment, only because I'm reading about
No.
history, I really didn't know about that.
No, it's interesting. In terms of fire policy, U.S. Forest Service fire policy, those are the big thresholds. I don't need to talk about, you probably have talked about some of this
Yeah, we
before.
didn't intro those policies.
Yeah, it's important to know that stuff happened because, we are gonna, or you guys, I'm gonna retire pretty soon. You guys are gonna run all over the country, and you're gonna see fires happening. You're going to know what our policies generally are better than you did before you were in here. That is the real foundation of Forest Service fire policy, and therefore our staffing, in our organizational structure. My argument, I'll just make it real simple. My argument was policy has changed a lot. Has fire on the Cleveland changed that much? I mean, do you have different kinds of fire? Do you have more stand replacing fire than you used to have? Does any of that really apply here? If we're just talking about the forest, not talking about the whole national forest system.
So with our forest, we seem to tend, instead of caring for the land more, we're using fire to help ecology, the landscape and all that, where we're looking at how the Forest Service in general is, in Region 5, is looking at community protection. So what we've done is, where we're putting fire is down for community protection versus, okay, how is this going to help the ecological family that's out there in these areas? Which is kind of different than what the southeast and some of those other places do, where they do it for ecological versus the life. Because in the south zone, there's more life, so the priority is that life, not resource.
Yeah.
So everybody's focused on building fuel breaks here and there around communities versus like going into like timber stands and saying, okay, we're gonna put a low concentrated fire on the ground to help produce either more trees or whatever.
Yeah. In general, I would agree with you, other than that really in the last, I don't know, since 2000, the trend has been everywhere in the country to mainly focus in on community protection. It's been wildland urban interface. That's been the focus of field treatments.
I think fires changed though. I think our fires, I think we've had, when I first started, I remember all the folks that have been around for years, we didn't have Santa Ana wind events every year. It was every couple of years. You might have a small one, but you had big events every couple of years. Not every year now. Now we're having them year round. It seems like they didn't have as many large, fire season didn't start till like June, even down south. Down here, and we'd have really small fires. When I first started, we had these little warm-up fires, quarter acre, half acre, in the grass. It was kind of in the grass, starting into the chaparral. Come July, it would get into the brush and start burning a little bit more. By August, it was we were into the brush. And now, some of the first fires we go to are 30, 40, 60,000 acre fires. So I think, the climate's changing. There's more people in Southern California, and we've had more starts, and they've become greater fires than we have. Those folks that when I first started that were retiring, they might go to a couple of those in their career, and now we're going to several of those a year, all over the country. So
Well, I agree with that, but I think the fire effects and things though, they're really different, right? So it's not like the stand structure has changed necessarily. I mean,
I think some of the fire effects have changed though, because I think they're burning more intensely and they're taking out more vegetation. Now, but then again, I was on the Angeles when the station fire happened, and you drive around and there's a lot of pockets, there's brush still standing. Several hundred acre pockets that are still there that didn't burn in that they got whatever reason and moved around them. And so there's, everyone thinks it's nuked off 150,000 whatever it was acres, and it's not. It did a lot of stand replacing areas, but there's a lot of areas that weren't touched by it.
Yeah, okay, I don't know if there's actually been any change in the frequency of Santa Ana events. I would not
That's just
think.
what they said.
I would not think so. I was born down here. I was born in East LA and grew up in Orange County. Used to run around in the Trabuco district and probably introduce weeds.
That was you.
I'm the vector. Now, we used to go camping up there all the time when I was a kid, and I'm sure we dragged stuff from everywhere. You know, I was in Boy Scouts. You know, you got to camp heavy.
Planted broom as a community project.
Oh yeah, yeah. Beautify nature.
And picked up arrowheads, for sure.
I would never do that.
It's a favorite pastime of the Boy Scouts.
Yeah. Yes, it is. But you're absolutely right. If you look at the occurrence of large fires, it certainly looks like it's increasing. Now, we only really have, 100 years worth of data to base that on, and there's no question that fire seasons are lengthening. You know, you have longer falls, longer springs. And if that happens, the higher frequency of larger fires is likely. The Santa Ana conditions, are they restricted to the fall? I mean, they kind of happen all winter too, don't they? It's just that fuel conditions are not always there to support the fires. Well, you lengthen the fuel conditions, it doesn't take a whole lot to make it significantly larger. So I agree that not only are we seeing that, but it's going to continue in that path. So what was the point of what I was talking about? It's probably about the first time I'll say that. The world of fire ecology is kind of what I'm supposed to address. And fire ecology, I don't know how much of a feel for this you guys got, but it's a really new field of study. It's new and it's still fairly fragmented and it's just mostly holes. Okay, we seem to know a lot of things and we try to consolidate things, but in reality there's a whole lot more that we don't know than that we do know. Although we know a lot more than we used to. But how new is that? You went over things like fire regimes, right?
Yes.
Okay, did you talk about history of them at all?
Yes. We talked about all the way up from the early ones, the Heinzman ones, all the way up to the new framework fire regime.
Yeah. Okay, now, how long ago was that? Do you guys remember? Just generally. I'm not going to throw anybody a candy bar because I didn't bring one.
Left.
Yeah, well, no, I'll just eat it. So, do you have any idea when people started to classify fire regimes, or even care about that kind of stuff?
60s, 70s when they caught on, but some were already doing that work in the 60s, like Bissell. Is it Bissell?
Yeah, there was work going on with fire regimes in general. Things like the light burning movement, it goes back quite a ways before Biswell even. But really, the first fire regime classifications were in the 80s, in the 1980s. Now, how recently was that? Well, first time I did a prescribed burn was in 1981. Okay, so it's not very long ago. I mean, I've been working for a long time. Seems like forever, but it's not. And if you're talking about things like fire cycles in, I don't know, most of these chaparral types that you have here, you're not talking about a very long period of time there. And so why are we constructing these things and why are we focusing on them? It's because most of the time that I've been working in this field, what we've done is try to create ways to look at fire that has some meaning, both to when you're looking at fire and when you're looking at it as an ecological or biological process. So what has meaning? Do we care if fires happened up here all the time if they don't have any real consequence? Well, chaparral's got to burn, You know, it's gonna burn eventually, right? There's a boatload of fuel out there, and it's, you know, the fuel and air mix is really good. Why doesn't it burn more often? I mean, there are answers to those things. You can answer that one probably, right?
No ignition sources.
That's a really important thing. Why aren't there any ignition sources?
Our climate doesn't give us the lightning that other areas get.
Yeah, and do you know how important that is to understanding fire regimes? It's absolutely critical, because there were, even before people were here, could there have been real high-frequency fires in most of South Coastal California? You know, they would have had to have burned in. I'm talking about before any people were here.
Yeah.
How frequent could they have been?
Well, I think every year we have tropical storms that come through almost every seasonal thing. And I don't know if the histories have labeled that they came, like the Baja, we're part of the Baja Peninsula, the strip all the way to the Sanjak. And I've read that there were lightnings that were checked, so they were burning more acres because there was no one to stop them anyway.
But there's not as much lightning in Southern California in this area than there is in Northern California or Central California, like the Sequoia, the Sugihara, stuff like
Or
that.
pretty much any place else with a Mediterranean climate. Well, by contrast, if we have a fire that starts somewhere, I don't know, in the Sierra Nevada, burns down into the Central Valley of California, and it's August 1st. Where's that fire going to go out and when?
Without any human intervention or something?
Yeah, no people on the landscape at all.
Where did it start?
It's talking about the Central.
August
Sierra
1st.
Nevada, and then like the Central. And then
Gonna end up back in the high country and whenever the snow falls.
Yeah, and
sometime.
how much of the Central Valley is going to burn? Where you have fairly light fields. We have non-native grasslands. I mean,
Well, but we're talking about
my model of it is a little screwed up because, you know, my entire lifetime has been a non-native grassland, which is a different fuel system than it would have been historically.
Because you would have also had a lot more water in the Central Valley than we do now.
Yes,
because of all the
absolutely.
damming of the rivers and everything. So you
Yeah,
had
lots of
very,
wetlands.
very different fuel loads down there.
And the whole southern end of the valley would have been a giant lake and wetland. Although, did those areas burn? Did it burn across the surface of the water? Those wetlands?
Probably 2,000.
It did a lot of places, yes. So fire would have been really common in there. I mean, I'm not going to throw numbers out. All I'm going to say is that it requires virtually no ignitions over a massive landscape. But if you come down here, you have a much more complex landscape. You have steep mountains coming right down into the ocean. You have fuels that are primarily shrublands, and they will carry fire very well under certain conditions, but not under other conditions, right? And those are fairly limited and is broken up through the summer. Different fire system. This part of California naturally has a lot less fire frequency, lower fire frequency than almost the whole western United States. You know, it's not that different now probably than it has been in the past in terms of just fire frequency. So if you look at an ecosystem like that, it gives you a different view of it anyway. And you know, you can change all that. You can flip it backwards and run it the other direction. The point is, we put together things like fire regime descriptions so that we would be able to talk about these things. We could talk about what's changed, you know, what if it's an attribute-based fire regime system, you could say, okay, frequencies changed, but fire intensity and severity have not changed that much, or seasons are longer or not. You can identify which pieces are different, and then you can hopefully do an assessment of the ecosystems and talk about what we have in the future. You can project. You can prescribe a fire regime to a system that should be able to maintain it, or one that'll convert it. Can we effectively do type conversion in chaparral just by using fire and invasive weeds? It's a dynamite combination. You can just go out there and burn it as often as it'll burn, and it'll convert. Right? We have plenty of examples of that along the urban interface. But once you get out away from there, fire frequency doesn't really support large-scale type conversion, although that we argue a lot about that now. The field of fire ecology has really changed. Okay, the other thing that's changed in the past few decades is that it is a field now, and my undergraduate degree is in botany, and master's work was working with fungi, and then I went to work for the Park Service for a long time, and then I went back and did a PhD at Berkeley doing work with gap phase succession in coastal redwood forests. Okay, I never studied fire. And why is that? It kind of leads you to the next step in what we've really done is intentionally build infrastructure to build fire ecology as a field of study, which is a weird thing to do. I've been here as the fire ecologist in the regional office since 1995. I was the first fire ecologist for the Forest Service, at least in California. And so I didn't, this is how much I knew about what I was doing at the time, is I had done a bunch of work with fire, but I didn't have any idea that we didn't have a fire ecology program. So the first thing was to go find out, what it was, who are your peers. There's no peer group. Okay, there's a bunch of individuals who work with fire, working in different settings. And so what we've done is intentionally go about building it together with other agencies. It's very much the same system throughout, and then building lots of pieces, including academic programs and those types of things which have to support it. But the interesting thing about it is all of that got built from management programs. Okay, a lot of times, in fact, most fields of study have enough history so that everybody went to school, they learned about some basics, and then they went out and worked in management. Fire is different. The stuff that you guys do and the projects that you guys do probably have most of the time never been studied. Wouldn't you say so, Stephen? These are the guys who are inventing it and pushing the field forward. In this world, science has a tendency to sort of backfill, quantify things, create models and predictive ability. But what you guys are learning is really kind of the standard of where things are going. And the projects you're doing oftentimes have risk involved in them just because there isn't that historical backlog. We've done a kind of a massive effort at building all this stuff in the last couple of years for one main reason. Okay, Forest Service established in the early 1900s. Why? What were they first called?
Reserves.
Yeah, most of them were called forest reserves. A lot of them were watershed focused. Some of them probably had other focuses, but primarily timber reserves.
Watershed.
Yeah, and so if your focus is really to manage watershed and timber, what do you do with fire? What's the role of fire management? What your program? What should you guys be doing? Because we're a land management agency. We're not a fire department, right? So how does the fire program support land management?
stopping fires, if that's a policy, or if now we're gonna integrate into prescribed burning.
Well,
or-
to keep the timber, right?
Yeah, when we're in a simpler model of the past,
Oh, okay.
where we're really focused on either timber or watershed, we don't really want fire in that, do we? So when did that change?
The 70s.
Yeah, starting in the 70s, I think you're exactly right. Starting in the 70s, we started to focus on what else? The botany program, when did it get established in the Forest Service, do you know?
As far as I know, 6 months ago when I started.
Before 6 months ago, there was no botany program. But they're really, I mean, it's a relatively short-term thing. I remember when I was in school studying botany, it was all new. You know, there weren't people who went out and got jobs doing land management type stuff. Not so much for range. Range has got way more history to it. You know, it's been scientifically driven for a lot longer than pretty much everything else, except maybe silviculture or something like that. But probably the same. And a lot of fire stuff grew out of range because that was how people thought. They managed ecosystems. But we have all the people who were here talking today. We call them specialists. Why do we call them specialists?
Because they're specially trained in the area that they're working in.
And you're not?
He's a technician. These are specialists, we're technicians.
Thanks, Lorraine.
Tell me you guys are not very, very specifically trained in a profession.
Yeah.
And it's as complicated as anybody else's. It is. You also have more training, which sort of leads you to two conclusions. One of them is that you can't go outside and get the training. And the other one is that it needs it. You know, it's absolutely necessary. So, I have a hard time with the term specialist, although we call them resource specialists, so I understand why. Yeah, you're ologists. You guys are ologists too, you just don't know it.
Well, it's easier to say, we're bringing the hydrologist, the range specialist, the...
Oh yeah. I've been an ologist too, even though I work for the fire guys. But the point of that is that, I don't know what the point of anything is. Is that we have a profession. You know, we have a profession that has all. I don't know what the numbers game really is, but I would say the majority of the people who work for the Forest Service work in fire.
It's 52%.
Numbers.
Give that girl
She's-
candy.
Here, have a remote.
Oh, nice catch, Pete.
Okay.
At least it wasn't in your face.
So anyway, it's most of the Forest Service, right? I mean, it's a big chunk of it anyway. And yet we seem to maintain this separation from the mission of the agency, which is to do what? Manage land. And it's one of the reasons why I think that this program is important, because it kind of brings that information to you guys, although it also has the benefit of going the other way. You know, they get to talk to you guys too. And we all work for the same team. We all manage the same land. And I happen to think, from my point of view, that fire ecology is the center of the universe. But everybody should think that their own work is the center of the universe. The main big point in this is that what happened starting in the 1970s, coming back to that, was that the desire of the public who tells us what to do, right? anybody's ever worked in any sort of land management planning type stuff knows who's in control. Two people, or two entities, the public and the politicians. Okay, we don't decide what we're going to do. And we shouldn't decide what we're going to do because it's public land. So, since we're mandated to follow through on that, the values of the public are what drives the mission of the agency. So, instead of protecting trees so that we can cut them down, what happened in the 70s?
They got educated.
Yeah, well, why? I mean, that's a great term, education. Why?
Some papers were written at the time by fire folks, one in particular by a guy named, I think, Warren. I could be wrong about that, but it just was, they were doing more studying and research on prescribed burn and fire stuff. So they were able to print articles and people started reading it and became curious, and then there was more of a push towards preserving what we had. And endangered species and those kind of things were stirred in the public.
Okay, now I have a little bit different opinion on that.
Okay.
Now I agree with you. Things were being written, but I think they were sort of the same byproduct of changes in social values, but as our policies. But what? And this might seem really stupid. But before, okay, when I was a kid, a couple of years ago, there was, I don't know, you wouldn't call it a back to nature thing. I mean, that happened in there somewhere too. But really what we started to do is use public lands for recreation on a normal basis. And why? I mean, I'm talking, we being the population of the country. Why did we do that?
It was free.
What's that?
It was free.
Absolutely, it was free. And how much money did we have to spend when I was a kid? Yeah, nothing. We could go camping, it didn't cost anything, we could go fishing. Not only that, but it was more fun than doing anything else. We didn't have video games, I guess. The thing that changed is that people didn't think about national forests as someplace that they got lumber. They started to think about them as real places. And these are real places where you do real things, and a lot of the population was out in the woods then. Before then, unless you were hunting or even if you were, I guess if you were fishing, but you didn't get out there too far. A lot of it because it was not accessible. The road systems weren't that great and they weren't necessarily available to you. When was a lot of the timber cut even in the West?
Earlier in the 1900s.
Some was during the mining era, but I would say during the post-World War II era, you had massive construction of houses in suburbs, places like I grew up. It was all this huge economic boom. Okay, so that improved access, it improved visibility. Suddenly, these places have value as places. We go to national parks and get to see pieces of landscapes, but then we've got this gigantic resource of national forest land. So it all becomes visible to people. So what happens? It happens when you become more familiar with something. You start to value it, right? You value the plants on it. You value everything on it. And so all of a sudden there's a big interest around it. You get a bunch of people running around thinking something's really great. They sort of develop into groups that, are going to focus just on, the water resources or just on, scenic resources, all that stuff. Mountain biking, eventually, all of this. And so what does that have to do with what we do with national forest land? it means their primary value is no longer consumptive uses, right? At this point, we don't really log to produce lumber anymore. It's almost never, if it ever is, the number one reason to cut. It's either stimulate economy or do fuel treatments or salvage post-fire trees that have been killed. It's a completely different perspective. So what does that mean? So timber becomes a lower level priority. Silviculture becomes a lower level priority. Range was probably never a massive program anyway, but certainly it suffered during the same era. So what didn't go away?
Suppression.
Yeah, fire. I mean, fire's here. Not only that, but then there's stupid people like are sitting in the room who happen to think that fire is got a story to tell too. It's part of the ecosystem. It is probably the most altered ecological process that we have. It's massively important in sort of creating ecosystems. So what do we need to pay attention to? No matter what other resource we're focused on, we have to play in the fire regime, fire realm. Right, fire regime. So again, what we saw here was that the understanding of fire and ecosystems needed to be really broad, needed to be really deep, and it needs to be fairly complex. We need to be able to deal with something that is an immediate process but has long-term, short-term implications. And my view of it was really probably not so much just plants, but it was plant. I'm really more of a plant community ecologist. So I deal with plant, vegetation types. And so, from my point of view, I was a vegetation ecologist working for the Forest Service after about 1990. And what we did at that time was primarily classify ecosystems. Potential natural vegetation. Anybody ever hear that term? Good. Hardly anybody. Just the people who I knew would. Because it's a concept of, okay, we define the vegetation in its climax form, in its ultimate development. And then we map it on the ground like this is nirvana. This is an undisturbed ecosystem. Okay, well, fire wasn't part of that. And the program that I worked in didn't account for disturbances. It was all potential. And so my first smart thing that I did in that program was to move to the fire program, where that's all we focused on was fire. And not only that, but people operated in a much different ways, a much bigger, broader perspective where things are dynamic and they change, and you run around the country and you have a big view of how things work. Never undervalue that, because nobody else gets to do that. You get to see fire operating in ecosystems all over the place. And it's really different and it's unbelievably educational. But pay attention to it. You have to anyway because you're doing something there. But pay attention to why it operates, how it operates, wherever you are, and your understanding of fire in ecosystems, especially if you have some of the background that you've got through this program, is just going to give you a huge amount of information for the future. So this is my notes. I can't write worth a damn. Okay, never could. I got 2 colors on here though. I haven't looked at a single one of them. I'm going to look at it for a second. I want to tell you a little bit about some of the programs in fire, and ask me things too, please, if you have any questions. So what is fire ecology now as opposed to what it was then? Because really then it was nothing. Okay, it was papers. Okay, how many of you read journal articles? Some
Now, as of what, a couple months now?
Yeah.
Since November.
Okay. It is a source of information, and there used to be some scattered things. I mean, really, when I was first working with fire, you had to go to the library to find journals. Okay, and I worked at Redwood National Park. You know where I would have to go to a library to find journal articles on fire?
Eureka.
No, some stuff was at Humboldt, a lot of stuff you had to go to Berkeley. So now you can just type whatever you want to know into your phone, and you can come up with a better answer than I could have come up with then, for a couple of reasons. One of them is there's a boatload of information now. I mean, people who are scientists in this field tend to be like scientists everywhere else, and they have a perspective of about like this. It's real narrow, and it's not everybody's like that, but in general, it's got blinders on that are probably a little bigger than you need to be. Damn, what time was I supposed to quit talking?
You can keep going, I guess. We get more tape.
I told you it wouldn't take very long. I'm rambling, but I always ramble. The point is that what we have needed to run a management program is synthesis and consolidation of that information. And so most of the work that we've done, that I've done, has not been research since I came to work for the Forest Service. It's been in consolidation, and it's been to make information accessible and to get more of it to be created. So I want to talk about 2 or 3 things. One of them is, did you talk about the Joint Fire Science Program at all?
I don't know if we've
Or
ever
the
really brought
consortium.
that up. No. I've introduced them to the California Fire Science Consortium
Yeah.
through some webinars, but not only JFSP specific.
Yeah, about probably 15 years ago, a bunch of us sat down at a meeting at some ski resort in Utah, and I don't know why we were there. But, it was a bunch of fire research people or people who would know anything about that. And the task was to come up with a way to deliver fire research better. And, I mean, that's a pretty general task. But what it ended up doing is we put together the framework which became the Joint Fire Science Program. Then a bunch of different agencies and different fire research funding sources all got put into one. Okay, this is worth paying attention to, because almost all of the fire research in this country goes through the Joint Fire Science Program. It's funded through there, and they have these things now called consortia. There's the California Fire Science Consortium, and it is specifically designed to deliver fire science to you guys, to people who are doing something. Not people who are studying things, but people who are doing things. And there's a whole bunch of ways that happens. Some of them are taking research papers and putting them into briefs, which is, I don't know, of some value. And then probably you distribute them to
Yeah, I don't know if
folks.
you guys have seen emails I sent out. I will, where they'll send briefs out.
Yeah, there's supposed to be one-page summaries in sort of terms people can understand. I can even read some of them. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about. field of study now. We put together something called the Association for Fire Ecology, which used to run meetings every year in San Diego conferences, but now they're kind of all over the country, and it's a big international group. But originally it was here in California, and it has a whole bunch of things. There are certification programs for accreditation for academic programs, but certifications for people in a number of different things. There's a journal, they have conferences. Between they and the California Fire Science Consortium, they have things like webinars, and they have workshops that you can just call up and have. If somebody did a study that's of interest, you could call them up and have them do a workshop here in the forest if you want, on almost anything. Anyway, all that stuff does is make researchers available to you and research available to you if you have an interest. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is land management plans. What are they and why do we care? You guys know. What?
Well, they should know too.
What's that?
They should know too.
Okay, what's a land management plan do for fire?
It lines out where our goals are, pretty much where we're heading and where we should head.
Exactly. It sets the objectives, okay? Which is a long, legal, complicated process. But the bottom line is it tells us what we should be accomplishing, what we're trying to do. And I think it's amazingly simple when it comes right down to it. The land management plans themselves are these gigantic documents of which, little pieces are actual working parts. And so it tells us what we should be doing because, again, the public is making those decisions, and that's the public document. So for this forest and for all the southern forests here, really our task in that is not to manage wildfires and that type of thing, but really to put them out, right? Whether we want to or not, that's what our direction is in the land management plan, and so legally that's what we're bound to do. That doesn't mean we can't do anything, because obviously there's a whole bunch to work with within that. But when we do things like project plans and individual area plans of any sort, they all need to go back to that, and then the objectives in those projects need to at least be working within the land management plan. Well, if you have any stomach for this kind of stuff in the long run, these are really good things to be involved with, because the ones that are coming out now, we're doing them very differently. We're not sitting in the background as much as we had to in the past. And in fire effects, fire regimes, whatever you want to call it, is a huge driving part of those documents. And it'll come back around here again, probably not for another decade or so. But when you're working other places, understand that it runs the whole gamut from we don't want any fire on the landscape to fire is everything. And then we're just going to back off and manage it. And it's going to go, at least in the next few years, it's going to go much more strongly toward managing wildfires as well as prescribed fires. So I'm taking up too much time. I would talk forever. If you guys want to ask anything, go ahead though.
We're getting towards the end of the day.
Yeah.
How many ecologists are there in the region?
Fire ecologists? Right now working, there's just you and me and Clint.
And we have 2 on the Plumas.
Okay, 2 on the Plumas. There's a couple of that are being filled right now.
I know 1 up on the 2 on the 6 rivers.
1 on the 6 rivers, I think. Yeah.
You know, Becky's province is sitting on the El Dorado.
Yeah, but Becky's not a fire ecologist. There are ecologists and there are fire ecologists. The ecology program does more than just fire, but they have a lot of fire expertise too, and there is a province ecologist here. There are no fire ecologists in the southern half of the state.
That is interesting.
So that is one reason why sometimes you see us working at a kind of a different level, and we're not on the ground where we ought to be. But hopefully what it does is sets up tools for when we have a lot more people like here, which I always hope happens. I've spent most of my career banking on the fact that we would. So. Thanks.
Thank you.